Hello and welcome to section 3 of Memory and Learning, and that's about consolidation, storage, retrieval, and retrieval of information. So, after encoding information, new information, it is prepared for consolidation, and then it is transferred for storage, and after that it is imprinted in the storage sites and the pathways leading to it, and then it can be retrieved. And when you recall or retrieve information, it becomes fragile and it will need to be reconsolidated. So we constantly, as we recall information verbally or in writing and so on, every time it becomes susceptible to distortion, and then we need to it needs to be reconsolidated again. That makes it possible to modify, so that information becomes always ready to be modified, and that's part of neuroplasticity. So the consolidation process or consolidation is defined as the process by which fragile short-term memory trace is transferred into stable long-term memory before directing it to the new cortical areas, different from the medial temporal lobes for long-term storage. Why medial temporal lobes? Because that is the processing engine. The medial temporal lobe, you remember the hippocampus is inside, deep buried inside of the temporal lobe, and from outside there is the auditory association cortex that integrates auditory information with memories. So that is the only site here that is initially processing the information, of course, and sorting it out to connect it and send it to storage sites along the cortex. The cortex, that 4 millimeter layer that covers the top of the brain, that is the site that stores information. So other than that, the neocortex, all these, the cortex, because it's the newest part of the brain, it is the site that is where the information is transferred to in different locations, because different locations are specialized in different types of skills and memories and categories and so on. And this process is the consolidation basically means that the information becomes established in long-term memory. It becomes not susceptible to distortion. The idea is that as information is coming in, some information it is sorted out based on importance. And there are systems who tag the information to say this is high importance. And the information that receives high importance, as it is being processed to be filed and tagged, to be filed and stored, that is emotionally related information. The information that is related to has a personal meaning or relates to the person on a personal level. So, and the way to do that is to connect it with emotions, to make the information emotionally relevant. So, for example, you could teach a lesson on smoking and how smoking causes 57 kinds of cancer, and how a cigarette contains 7,000 chemicals. Okay, you can get these facts, go to the Department of Health and pull the information. Very, very impressive. And there are a lot of data and things to analyze and to present. That is one way to do it. But what if you kind of speak and say, well, my grandfather, he worked here and there, and he used to smoke, say, this number of cigarettes a day. My grandfather did this and this and that. You make the story now a personal story. What about if you ask a child to write about someone who the child knows smokes, for example? That is going to make the information more emotionally relevant. So making it so that the person can relate to it on a personal level, that is more likely to make the information tagged, to make it specially memorable, in other words. The glucocorticoids are hormones that are related to stress, and they are called stress hormones. They are important for memory. However, when they are elevated, when you have more than is required, then the effect will be reverse. They will actually harm memory, because, and also the health in general. They are going to raise blood pressure. They will raise a lot of like, say, especially cortisol levels, and that is going to eventually lead to heart and cardiovascular problems. So what you need is a level that is just enough to keep you active and to keep you able to kind of not to be hypoactive or sleepy and so on, to have the right level of arousal to be able to learn. So this is what we mean. And you do this by finding the level where you should challenge the individual, the student. If you find that level, say, for example, you know that they are able to do this skill with 100%, when they do it, they do well. Then if you keep doing a skill at the same level, they are not going to learn new skills, and they will be bored. So, and some of the kids, when they are bored, they misbehave, they engage into irrelevant behavior, and you perceive them as misbehaving. But before that, ask yourself, are you engaging them in the task? Are you challenging them enough? So you go a little bit above that level, and then you are in kind of inducing these glucocorticoids to produce some kind of level of challenge. But if you go way high above their level, then the effect is going to be negative. They will not be able to relate or engage in the task, and they will be very, very stressed out. And the effect is that there is no learning. It has to be right. And how you achieve this is by understanding the level of the competence of your child, of your student, so that you go a little bit above it, and you challenge them just the right amount. So emotionally arousing experiences, for example, they are influenced or modulated in memory by the glucocorticoids. The glucocorticoids, stress hormones, enhance the consolidation of emotionally relevant experiences, but they do not affect memory consolidation for neutral information. That information about the statistics about smoking from the Department of Health and so on, that is emotionally irrelevant as long as you do it as statistics. There is a percentage of this and that smoke in the United States, and the percentage of this and this number gets this kind of cancer, laryngeal cancer, heart, this, that. Now, all of these things are not particularly, they are neutral at this point. Once you connect that to say my grandfather or my cousin, then it becomes emotionally relevant, and that is going to have a high importance, and that is what is mediated by the glucocorticoids. But when the information is neutral, then the stress hormones are not as much involved. So in a case like this, for example, a baby is going to engage in a traumatic experience. If he touches the flame, then that is a highly charged, highly kind of a negative emotional experience, and that is going to be tagged, especially tagged for high importance. Why? Because it's a safety issue, and the nervous system, the brain, needs that information to be highlighted, to be important, so the event is not repeated again. The areas involved in consolidation include of course, the hippocampus. That is the major system, which is the hub where all information comes in and then gets sorted out and then sent up to the cerebral cortex. Also the basal ganglia, you have the amygdala. We discussed it before. Also the cerebellum is important, involved in that, especially in motor consolidation. And then the prefrontal cortex plays a serious and significant role in the process because it has a direct pathway with the hippocampus, and the information is shuttled back and forth, frequently back and forth, in order to be vetted, to be checked, to be so that the hippocampus can get direction from the prefrontal cortex to say, this is important, keep it, this is, and so on. And the prefrontal cortex has working memory functions as well. So you can see the path, this is the hippocampus, and how it has many connections. Of course, as it goes, of course, it connects with the entire cortex. So, and it has a special pathway to the frontal lobe, and then to the prefrontal area particularly, and that pathway becomes activated continuously back and forth while you are processing the information. The hippocampus integrates, of course, the hippocampus does not store memories for long term. So the hippocampus stores information just for maybe 1 hour or so, and while it is being processed, and then it initiates the storage of the information. So one of the major functions of the hippocampus is to integrate different pieces of memories, episodic memories, that have to do with what you are learning and so on, and integrating that into one whole unit, one whole cohesive unit where all these parts are connected in a cohesive kind of unit, like a story with different pieces that are sequenced appropriately. So while the person is experiencing an episodic event, for example, elements of the event are deposited in a buffer called an episodic buffer. For example, you are going to spell, or you are taking in, say, a concept, like say a word or hippocampus. As the information goes in, it goes in units, and then these are assembled and integrated. While you are trying to retrieve the word hippocampus from the brain, from the cortex, then you go hippo, you retrieve 1, 2, 3, or 4 sounds, and then there's a little kind of, as soon as you take these 4 in from the storage site, then the other 4 come in. And then you say this, and then the other 4 come in. When there's a gap in between these units that you are retrieving, then that will be a period of time when there's consolidation. So as long as the information is continuous and you are presenting it and so on, then the consolidation is not yet initiated. When there's a gap, then the brain starts to consolidate. What does this tell us? When you have little breaks between tasks, before you change tasks, if you divide a task into smaller segments and just give a minute break, a half a minute transition, even silence, that is going to activate the consolidation phase. There is a bi-directional pathway between the hippocampus and the neocortex. The neocortical pathways, the most prominent one is from the hippocampus to the prefrontal cortex, and it's bi-directional. The hippocampus sends information, and then the prefrontal cortex sends back with the directions. So back and forth to make sure to sort out and decide on the information and its level of importance and so on. So the pathway, the more it is activated, the more that it is activated easier, and the more that it can be, the faster it can go. So the pathway becomes more active during the first few minutes or few hours after you encode the information. So you take the information in, it is processed for like 20 minutes or so, and then it starts to be, the pathway becomes active after that in order to take in, to process the information and prepare it to store. So consolidation can take from hours to years, can can go even 2 years. And that depends on the level of knowledge, the level of your background knowledge. For example, you learn a concept. Say a baby learns the word cat. And the baby, if you see the baby brown cat, show the baby a brown cat, the baby is going to think initially that any cat has to be brown. It has to fit the characteristics like the one that the baby first saw. So the baby sees a white cat next day and is going to call this cat might be white, and he's not going to recognize it as a cat because it is different in color. And then eventually, over time, the baby is within about 2 weeks or so is going to realize that cats can be white, black, brown, red, this and this and this, different. So he's going to expand his concept as he goes. There are many concepts like this in life. As we keep developing and growing and learning, the same little concepts we have, we expand and elaborate and understand them better as we go in life, as our age progresses. So if the person has a significant knowledge, quite extensive background knowledge, consolidation will be faster, and the ability to get information in will be faster, and you can get more information, and that, as I explained last time, is the expert effect. So these the pathways that are long-term memory pathways and your previous knowledge, this is essential in determining the quality of your learning. So ideally, you keep building learning by little memories, little pieces here and there, and the more you have, the faster you can get the information, the more efficient you become. So, it takes time to build to that level of skill and expertise. So information is going to take a longer time when the information, the background knowledge is not as extensive. And the reason is you are going to need when new information comes in, you are going to need to establish networks to support it and to hold on to it so that you can store it for long term. So if you already have long-term networks that have a large amount of knowledge, previous knowledge, that means you can integrate what you learn into what you already have. And also, the information you already have is going to serve as a background for you to evaluate the information that is coming in. And by doing so, when you have a lot of related knowledge that relates to what the new information that comes in, it facilitates the intake or the encoding of this new information and the integration and into long-term memory, and also the retrieval. So less familiar information is going to require a longer time to be, for example, processed, and the activation of the hippocampal prefrontal pathway is going to be brief, not as extensive. So that means that the information is not going to be elaborately processed, because when the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus connection is activated, that means the information is being elaborated, is being analyzed, and so on. And when the information is new, it will consume more cognitive energy, and that means that the prefrontal cortex will be involved longer because it needs to sort out this information, and it will take longer to do so, as opposed to information that's already familiar. So at the beginning of the early stages of consolidating the information first becomes distributed across the hippocampal neocortical pathways. The neocortex is the layer of basically the cortex, especially the layer of the brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, because that is the newest part of the cortex. So at that time, in the early stages, you prime the site or the connection between the hippocampus and the storage site by basically activating the pathway back and forth, making it fire and fire and fire. And the more it fires, the better it will connect, and the more spontaneous it will become. So that establishes automaticity. Consolidation occurs both during wakefulness and during sleep, and it occurs more extensively during sleep, especially for abstract knowledge, abstract learning that is the most complex kind of learning, is consolidated during sleep. It can be initiated during wakefulness, but substantially it is accomplished during sleep. The memory, as I mentioned before, is sorted out based on the level of importance, the level of relevance to your life and to your goals in life and so on. So there are systems to tag information for high importance, and also that information that is tagged for high importance, as I mentioned, with reference to the emotionally relevant information, that is going to be consolidated during sleep, and it will also be reactivated and replayed while you are sleeping because of the importance of it. You might even dream about it. The screen just froze. So let's look and see how sleep facilitates the consolidation process. The sleep is basically, in terms of the physiology of it, And in terms of the, for example, the kind of sleep itself, it is classified into three types. There's light sleep, deep sleep, and then rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep. And then sleep is also divided based on the kind of waves, brain waves that occur during particular parts of sleep. And sleep is also, so based on the waves, there are 4 major phases of sleep. And I say phases because when you take, say, 7.5 hours, divide them into 4. So as a result, you get 90 minutes. Let's see. Divide 7.5 by 4 equals, so that's about 1 almost 1.9 hours. So almost 110 hours, 110 minutes. Or 115 minutes, something like that. So these, when you split sleep into these 4 parts, say 1 hour, 1 hour and 50 minutes or something like that, and each phase is divided like this. Then you take every phase and you divide it into 5 little pieces. So light sleep commonly is experienced during the first and the second stages of sleep. And deep sleep occurs between the third and fourth, from the third and fourth stages. And then rapid eye movement sleep is about the 5th stage. So when I say phase, inside of the phase there are stages. And you take every stage, they are exactly these phases. Every phase has the same stages like the other. And I will explain. So if you take a look at sleep generally, in terms of eye movement, there is you say sleep that has non-rapid eye movement sleep, when the eyes don't flicker and go around. And also the other kind is rapid eye movement sleep. So generally 2 categories in terms of the eye movement. So non-rapid eye movement sleep includes basically stages 1, 2 through 4. It is it is characterized by highly synchronized brain activity. So it keeps in synchrony, continuously moving, and the firing occurs also that has outbursts of firing. So for example, this is stage 1, for example, and then you have these patterns, they keep occurring, theta, for example, and then you have another kind of wave, and then you have the theta again, and you have another. So you just have these outbursts, as occasionally, but in a pattern. And you can see now stage 2, you have a slower kind of, slower, but it has some very condensed waves coming in together, and these are called sleep spindles. And then stages 3, you have delta waves. You can see the structure of them, and then you have rapid eye movement sleep. You know how that is fast activity, almost similar to wakefulness. So during non-rapid eye movement sleep, which is most of the stages, like from 1 to 4, you have decreased cerebral blood flow, and they have also decreased glucose metabolism. The energy is, consumption is decreased at that time. And then you have declarative memory circuits activated during slow wave sleep. So this is the slow wave sleep, when you basically have it in stages 2 and 3, mostly 3. So declarative memory, remember, is the kind of memory that is in textbooks, for example, in educational materials. It is memory that we are conscious and aware of, that we express, or we have, that we can express verbally or in writing about facts about the world and so on. But it's a conscious kind of memory. The stages 1, 2 of non-rapid eye movement sleep. Let's take them. So let's take one, like say one of the 4 phases, one phase. That one phase is going to have 5 little segments in it. And the first segment is very brief. As you put your head on the pillow, you start to process your gross motor activities throughout the day. The kind of the gross motor and the movements and all of this is processed in the first stage of sleep when you put your head on the pillow. So out of that 1 hour and 50 minutes, you are going to have about 10 to 15 minutes of this kind of sleep of stage 1 at the beginning of this kind of sleep initially, that is between wakefulness and sleep, as you drift to sleep. So then you go again into stage 2, that is within the same phase, stage 2, which is dedicated to particular kinds of processing of particular kinds of information, like fine-tuned, fine motor activities, emotional information. And then as you go to stage 3, stages 2 and 3 focus heavily on processing of emotionally related information. Anything that you experienced, any problem, any kind of situation you had, any kind of positive, negative, all this is processed during these phases. And then finally you have the duration of REM sleep in the first phase is about maybe 20 minutes or so, or maybe 20 to 25 minutes. And then the second phase, like 2 hours, when you have slept now 2 hours in the first phase, now we are the second 2 hours. You have, as you keep going, you have the same 5 stages. However, you are going to have less of the stage 1, and you increase and increase until you go and increase in the rapid eye movement sleep. It increases in the next phase into more than 20 minutes. So it keeps increasing and increasing in the third stage. In the fourth phase, it is primarily rapid eye movement sleep. So if you sleep 7.5 hours, your last 2 hours are primarily the most it is the time when you process the most complex kind of information. So now you notice when you put your head on the pillow, that stage is called, it is characterized by the processing of motor information you have, and the connection between your prefrontal cortex and the motor cortex here is still being kind of this kind of disengaged a little bit, so that the prefrontal cortex doesn't have like that heavy kind of control, to suppress the movements. Like say, for example, I'm talking now, and I can think about lifting my arm up, my right arm, lifting it up. So as I think of it now, my motor cortex is going to fire as if I am lifting my arm. However, the frontal part of my brain, it has mechanisms to suppress even though it is firing, it has mechanisms here to suppress issuing the command down to my arm to move it. However, as the prefrontal cortex starts to disengage from the motor cortex and you are sleeping, the inhibition is not there, and you end up having these hypnagogic dreams, like between wakefulness and sleep. And then as you process these movements and things that you do, you might jerk, extend your hand. You are dreaming that you are doing something, and then you act it out motorically, because the inhibition mechanism is starting now to kind of disengage itself, and the motor cortex might actually, instead of replaying the activities, it might, as it replays them, it might physically induce, the movement of the organs that it is connecting. So you notice we call these hypnagogic dreams. They are very fleeting, very quick, and generally some people dream of falling off the bed and then jerking and waking up. That is because at that time, your brain is replaying, that part is replaying all the movements and things that you did during the day. Now, as you drift deeper into this stage 2, that makes about 50% of the sleep. So there's no eye movement, and there's decreased heart rate and decreased temperature, and the slower waves with a brief bursts of rapid brain activity known as the sleep spindles. So these, again, as you could see them here, condensed bursts, fast rhythm kind of activity. So this non-rapid eye movement sleep is required for transferring of information for long-term storage. So the transfer process happens during non-rapid eye movement sleep, especially during stages 2 and 3. Non-rapid eye movement sleep, the spindles particularly are important for the consolidation of new information. Because the first stage of sleep is dedicated to physical motor activity, processing and replaying and reprocessing that information. It facilitates what is known as procedural memory. Procedural memory is memory that is both motor and cognitive, but it becomes more motor as you do it. It becomes more of a procedure as you do it more and more. And this involves activities that we do almost every single day, and we do them so frequently that our motor system becomes kind of engaged in these activities, and we do not exert much cognitive effort. For example, when you learn how to drive a car initially, the task is very hard. It is cognitively, you cannot have someone sitting next to you and talking at the same time, because you are focused driving. If there's any distraction, you might hit something. And so as you keep practicing and you do this so many hours, then that becomes a procedure. Then it is stored in procedural memory. It means you do steps and they become so spontaneous that you barely need any cognitive effort in order to engage in these skills. Like when you go driving, you don't even remember that you're actually sitting behind the wheel, and you don't think about the process and what it takes to drive the car. You just go and just, so making coffee, making, for example, things that you do every day. So that is procedural memory. And it is the last kind of memory to be hit by Alzheimer's or by dementia, because it is so established in the nervous system. The quality of the spindles is correlated with intellectual abilities and with learning potential. So that these sleep spindles, when they occur at the predicted time, and when they occur as many times as they should based on the average. For example, people who have these occurring, for example, with the same number of times that they should, and with the same, for example, pattern as, exhibited by people who sleep well, that is a predictor of intellectual abilities, and it's a predictor of learning potential. So in other words, sleep is critical to learning, and it's critical for intellectual skills like working memory skills, recalling information, for example, the ability to focus and sustain and shift and switch attention, and so on. Stages 3 and 4, this is the stage 3 is the first deep sleep, and it has delta waves and faster waves. So stage 4 is almost exclusively made out of delta waves, which is that stage is longest in preschoolers and in school age children. Let's look at it again. Delta. So here, see, this is quite extensive firing and slower kind of activity. So that is, again, significant, and it occurs most frequently in early childhood. So these two stages, 3 and 4, are critical to, for example, replenishing the body reserves and making the person feeling refreshed the next day. Now, the last part of sleep, of course, which is rapid eye movement sleep, this is where 95% of the dreams occur. So it starts 70 to 90 minutes after sleep onset, and every stage, every phase. So what happens is the 4 phases of sleep. You sleep this amount of time. Say, basically, the first phase is about 1 hour and 50 minutes or so. So you sleep there, and you split it in half. You wake up basically 45 minutes, wake up, turn or do something, and then go back to sleep. And then keep, every 45 minutes, you keep flipping, going back, and so you wake and go, and then the every stage this way it has the same pattern like every other one. So rapid eye movement sleep occurs always at the end of every phase. However, in the first phase it is the shortest, and then the second phase it becomes longer, and the third phase becomes much longer, and the fourth phase it's almost exclusively rapid eye movement sleep, exclusively focused on abstract knowledge processing. So first phase lasts for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and gradually lengthens. And most dreams occur during rapid eye movement sleep. This is when, like, if you sleep regularly and say 7.5 hours, 10 o'clock, for example, you wake up at let's say 5:30, something like this. At that time, you might, if you wake up, you might vividly remember a dream that you were having. And what makes you remember that dream is that all these neurotransmitters that are associated with processing information and all of this are present. So while processing the dream, when you wake up, so you think, as you think about that dream, all the mechanisms is active and working. And as you keep thinking of that dream, it becomes integrated in your long-term knowledge, and it might not be forgotten. It could stay with you for life. But 90 to 95% of our dreams, again, occur during that time. And the majority of these dreams are forgotten before we wake up. So it's just the ones that we remember are the ones when, if you wake up while you are dreaming them, while we are experiencing them, immediately we start thinking about them and they get integrated. So a strategy is, if someone, say, wakes up from a nightmare or something that is very disturbing, and when they wake up, they should try to distract themselves, think about something else that is more positive until these chemicals and neurotransmitters are decreased, until the person, the potential for recalling that nightmare or bad dream, until the potential and the mechanism starts to slow down. But if you keep thinking and reviewing it more and more, recalling it, it is going to be stored for granted for sure. So infants during sleep, newborns, they sleep 21 hours during the first few months, and 50% of their sleep is rapid eye movement sleep. And that means they are dreaming, having so many dreams. What are they dreaming about? And they haven't even seen much at all. Like when a newborn is born, and the next day, and on the same day, sleeping and dreaming. What are they dreaming about? So that is, of course, the more and more research that investigates these areas, the more that we know that babies are born with certain kinds of knowledge. And dreams, rapid eye movement sleep makes up about 20% of adult sleep if you calculate it in all the stages. So it would make up about 20%. And you can see babies dreaming clearly, based on their facial expressions, and you just wonder, what in the world are they dreaming about? Rapid eye movement sleep is characterized by low voltage tonic firing, which is it's very similar to wakefulness. The activity is fast, or it could be faster than while you are awake. And I will explain to you why. So this stage is characterized by faster and irregular and shallow breathing, increased heart rate, and blood pressure. And the increased heart rate is also related to all these dreams that you have, and many of these dreams are could be negative, and they could be just elevating your pressure and making you sweat and all of this. But generally, these 2 hours generally are they have an increased heart rate and increased blood pressure, and they have a rapid eye movement and muscular immobility. Everything is immobile. You cannot move anything at all except for your eyelids. They would be flickering. So this is why it is called rapid eye movement sleep. This is the time when you have a dream and you just feel like, say, for example, something is chasing you, like a lion or something dangerous, and you are frozen. You can't run and you can't escape. That is because your body is completely immobilized, and it is reflecting your immobility in that kind of situation, when you feel you are in desperate situation and you cannot escape or run fast enough to escape. The neurotransmitters involved in rapid eye movement sleep include there are a couple like acetylcholine and norepinephrine. We'll speak about them. Serotonin. The acetylcholine regulates cognition and control of arousal and alertness. So your level of, again, alertness, arousal, like you are not hypoactive or falling asleep. It also regulates cognition, the ability to, to think and reason and so on. It is used in in the circuit that is, if you go back to the thalamus and the cortex, the thalamus, which is the size of two bird eggs, like a bird egg, but we have two of them in the core of the brain. It is connected extensively to the both hemispheres, connected extensively to the frontal cortex, connected extensively to the back of the brain. So it is extensively, it's connected to basically every part of the brain. So acetylcholine is used in the thalamic cortical, all these connections between the thalamus and the cortex, and also the brainstem, the brainstem cortical cholinergic system, which has acetylcholine. So the acetylcholine is important for activating theta rhythms that occur during this phase of sleep, and also desynchronization of cortical functions during sleep, which means cortical functions you want at that time to kind of take the control of the prefrontal cortex, make it kind of maintain its own function, so it doesn't exert the supervisory role that it plays on the other areas, especially the memory centers and the areas that are storing the information. So in that case, because of that, there is no rationalization. When you have a dream, there's no right or wrong. There is no just anything in a dream can happen. There's no judgment. Everything is possible, and that is because of the effect of the prefrontal cortex that is not awake to tell you to say, oh, you can't do this. This is not realistic. That is impossible, and so on. So dreams just, you just have no limit as to what you would dream of and the places that you would go to and your dreams and so on, because that supervisor is now taking care of himself or herself and not worrying about you downstairs or upstairs, whatever you're doing. So during sleep, the prefrontal cortex doesn't sleep completely, but it does kind of maintenance work, and it doesn't engage much with the other areas that it supervises. Norepinephrine supports memory consolidation of information that is emotionally relevant, and for example, that you experience when you process during memory, during slow wave sleep. Norepinephrine also supports consolidation of what is known as campus-dependent memories, which means that these memories that are stored, initiated, the storage of which is initiated by the hippocampus, and also in terms of the sequence of events You know how, say, for example, this happens on Tuesday, this happens on Thursday, this happens on, and so on. So a sequence of events based on logical sequence or time sequence, especially time sequencing, that is norepinephrine is important for consolidation of this information. Rapid eye movement sleep facilitates consolidation of procedural learning, as I explained, especially at the beginning of in terms of the looking at the steps. Procedures are steps, like if you have 5 or 10 steps of doing something. So you start processing early when you start sleeping, but rapid eye movement sleep is going to facilitate the integration of all these processes together and the sequencing of them and the consolidation of them. It also enables us to analyze, to break down things, complex concepts, into smaller units and examine the relationships among these units to basically do the actual processing and reprocessing. So all the information you will learn during the day is replayed, and rehearsed very, very quickly. It is like a tape that you play, but you play at a faster pace. It plays all the information, but and it doesn't play it in real time. It plays it in a very, very, very quick way. And this way you rehearse the information in a fast and effective way. So the rapid eye movement sleep also enables us to anticipate new challenges and to prepare us for contingency, motor, and cognitive plans. For example, experiments that they do, to test dreams and things like that. The Tetris game, when they have someone play like a skiing and game on a machine, and then they go to sleep, and they have dreams about, they process the movements that they did during the game. And naturally, you would think that they would have dreams about things that they actually did, that they kind of think about them. But in the rapid eye movement stage, that situation, the dreams that they have, go beyond, much beyond what they actually experience. For example, many people would dream that they come to a cliff and they just, they're speeding, coming down, speeding and going into a cliff, and then there's nothing at all. And then they just, float into the air, and there's nothing there. Like the move, like cartoons, Bugs Bunny or the Road Runner, or so the rationale for this, the explanation for this is that the brain, while it is processing all that you did, is going to throw in some things and say, what if you are doing this and you come to this situation? How will you be prepared? What will you do? So it puts like problems and things in front of you that, to say to you, do you expect this, or what if, and so on. So it enables you to come up with solutions and think about plans to overcome future possible problems that might occur along the way. So the consolidation itself involves connecting incoming information with already existing information, integration. Looking at the information generally and finding patterns and rules among the different pieces of information. For example, you hear things like, she ate an apple. And then the cat knocked the cup. And then the bird ate the seeds, and then the dog had breakfast. What is common among all of these? There's a pattern. They are all in the same, follow the same grammatical rule. What rule is that? It's a simple sentence. What kind of sentence? It's a subject, verb, object. So this is what during consolidation process, you extract these rules that are among different things so that you will think about them from a higher level, from a higher metacognitive, ability, metacognitive level. It enables you to have insight. Many of the discoveries, many of the inventions are reported to have occurred during sleep. For example, Mendeleev, who figured out the periodic table, he used to work in a place and would take the train, and then he would take the index cards where he would have the chemical names of the elements, and then he would lay them in front of him as he is traveling, and would just examine them, put this here, put this there. And he kept doing this every day, kept doing it and imagining, this kind of element and that, and every element had a card. And then at some point he went to sleep, and then he had a dream that he sequenced the cards in a certain way, similar to the table that we have today. And then he woke up immediately and just got the cards and resequenced them. And this is what that great, the great discovery that we have, that we know as the periodic table came about. It is reported that when Newton, had the apple fall in his head, that he went to sleep. The next day he figured out gravity. The guy who invented the benzene ring, to run cars and do all kinds of things, he had a dream of a snake that was eating its tail. So he figured it is that molecule is a ring. And then he figured it out this way when he searched, and then he came up with that. He discovered the benzene ring structure during sleep. So anyways, many experiments support that. If they give you a complex math problem or a complex whatever kind of problem, and then you can't solve it, during the wakefulness, and then you go to sleep, then you wake up and you have an insight into the right solution. So the idea is that sleep is critical. It enables you to reprocess information, especially rapid eye movement sleep. Reprocess the information that you learned, break it down, analyze it, and then consolidate it, and be creative. Enables you to synthesize, to figure out things, relationships among things that are not visible, that are not clear to you, and then you come up with these relationships and discover them based on reshuffling and reprocessing that information, recombining it in different ways. So the role of sleep in memory consolidation is critical, and at least some certain types of memory cannot be consolidated without sleep. Sleep enhances memory, especially weak memories will be enhanced during sleep. It redistributes new information and integrates it into our previous knowledge. So explicitly, knowledge, for example, explicit memory, for example, that is, or memories that are abstract, basically learning that happens in schools and colleges and so on, that is mostly processed during the rapid eye movement sleep. As I mentioned before, the mechanism, the circuits for rapid eye movement, the learning memory and learning circuits that are activated during rapid eye movement sleep are playing the information very quickly and continuously replaying and playing the information, and finding all possible solutions and all possible connections among different pieces of information, and without the input from the prefrontal cortex, because if you put reasoning there, it might limit your ability to look for different solutions and things that you might think are not possible, but you just give free rein to these circuits and say, be creative, come up with whatever you can imagine. Sleep is also important for unlearning. So if someone's trying to, for example, you have a student, and the student gets feedback from your exams, and there are many errors, and you discuss that with the student, and after that, they need to correct to avoid making these errors again. When they go to sleep, then the brain starts to, work on dismantling the networks that have the faulty information, breaking them apart, which is the process for unlearning. So there's weakening of certain associations between neurons and the synapses, for example. And also, in terms of learning new skills, you are going to, that induces formation of new dendritic spines and new new synapses to maintain information, for example. So again, sleep enables us to extract the gist of information, to get the whole picture. It enables us to analyze information on multiple levels and to synthesize, to invent new combinations of pieces we already have. It increases our response accuracy and self-confidence. Acetylcholine is a key contributor to this consolidation process during sleep, and it determines sleep-dependent information processing, which it refers to what I mentioned in terms of the specific types of memory that are dependent on sleep, that cannot be consolidated if you do not sleep. So because acetylcholine regulates the flow of information across the hippocampus. If someone, say for example, you view this lecture, and then a few minutes or maybe half an hour after, or 1 hour, something like that, then you sleep, that is going to increase the processing capacities. It will make the information more processed on a deeper level, and it will protect it against forgetfulness and distortion. The way that the learning and memory systems fire while you are awake, for example, like now viewing the video, that same kind of firing is mimicked during sleep, during rapid eye movement sleep particularly, and it could even be more intense. So for this reason, sleep, especially when we speak about the rapid eye movement sleep, that is a state of consciousness. Imagine a state of consciousness When you think about consciousness, you think it's when you are awake, but because of what it involves and how heavily it is involved in the memory and processing, it is a state of consciousness. If someone experiences positive emotions, like you say, you get something, you achieve something really great, and like say you get a good grade and you feel like so enthused and so happy, and then you go to sleep, that is going to enhance reactivation of memories during sleep, a slow wave sleep, stages 3 and 4. That is connected with the emotional processing aspect. So especially again, repeated activation of reward pathways by having motivation, by having something that makes you feel like, wow, you know, I did it, and so on. So, and of course, the way that how the person sleeps and the quality of sleep is going to make the person have look at experiences in a different way. If someone is sleep deprived, they're going to be negative, and they will, you know, the consequences will have an effect on their social and emotional well-being. Poor sleep quality leads to a negative interpretation of memories that the person stores. And sleep, of course, improves the ability to generalize math problems and to make the person come up with new strategies, and also put them in different contexts so that they can apply the same strategy to different, you know, different situations. Sleep also is very important for emotional learning and for control of emotions, decision making, judgment, reasoning, emotional expressions, and processing of faces, emotional expressions. It is many of the networks that are used by sleep are also shared by learning and by memory. So these, emotional system networks are shared with sleep networks and also with memory networks. So for this reason, when someone doesn't sleep well, their mood is going to be impacted. So you can think about conditions that your students will have. One of them is sleep apnea. And, you know, you have a child in the classroom sitting there and breathing through her mouth or his mouth, and they speak as if they are congested all the time. They're having a congestion. And when you really look for this and you ask the parents will tell you that, oh, the child snores. And the idea is that in the back of their throat here, the adenoids are enlarged and blocking the airway. And when the child sleeps, that airway is blocked. And the child is, you know, experiences sleep apnea throughout the night. Some children lose about 30% of their sleep because of that. So in the day, when they go to school, they're groggy, they're sleepy, and they are in a very bad mood. They wouldn't have the incentive to socialize, to engage in a class or anything. And if you try to, you know, engage them, they could be rude, they might cry, they might misbehave. And that is because the sleep deprivation basically dysregulates their emotional system. And when they sleep well, they are able to recalibrate the emotional system. Sleep deprivation is a leading cause of depression in kids. And now you know more than anyone else how very young children are now diagnosed with depression. It's increasing increasingly diagnosed among young kids. It elevates pain sensation and fear reactions. It decreases emotional intelligence. and it leads to difficulty in adapting to new situations. In other words, it makes the person rigid in his or her thinking. Storage and retrieval. The memory storage depends on long-term potentiation, means that you have a firing that continues for a long time. And that is made possible by glutamate, presynaptic glutamate as a neurotransmitter. And then you have the channels that receive that glutamate. So that is going to facilitate storage of the information. And there are mechanisms, for example, that I am not going to emphasize in this particular class, NMDA receptors, and also the insertion of AMP. So all of this means that the cell that is receiving the signals is going to have more of these receptor channels that are going to facilitate the flow of signals into the cell that receives the information. So you physically, as you are, in order to store information, you have to actually increase these receptors and to have enough of them to be able to support the storage of the incoming information. Another kind of mechanism that's involved in memory storage is called long-term depression. So long-term potentiation is for learning new skills, storing new information, new skills. Long-term depression is for dismantling, for unlearning. So this way also you want to store that, but you want to, as you dismantle, you want to keep that process so that, dismantle so that you kind of effectively forget or seize or extinguish a particular behavior. So how you do long-term depression is basically by decreasing the efficacy of synaptic strength. You decrease the connection that holds the synapse together gradually, and then dissociate and just separate them. And that is especially in areas like the hippocampus. So both of these mechanisms, long-term potentiation and long-term depression, they cause physical changes in the dendrites, in the spines, or the dendritic spines, for example, in terms of their number and their formation. So all of these little buds here, dendritic spines, these are the sites where neurons are gonna connect. And if you have less of them, you are not gonna have as many connections. If you have more synaptic dendritic spines, you are going to have more connections. Of course, plasticity dependent, like learning, is made possible because of brain plasticity and the ability of the brain to connect, make new connections, sever old connections, do this, and to keep frequently modifying its connectivity. It is this process, for example, the plasticity dependent synaptic connections are established and strengthened during the learning process, that are established and strengthened during the learning process, make it possible to activate a memory circuit by activating a subgroup of neurons of the circuit. So, in other words, let's say you have a circuit made out of, many structures like this. And that circuit could be the circuit in your room, where you have an electric circuit, you have different lights in the room. And let's say that you have 5 or 10 lights all of them, for example, they are connected to 5 switches. So the idea is if you put one switch on, it can activate the 5 lights. In other words, one of the advantages why the brain has networks is that if one element, one connection goes down, then the other ones can still carry the function and they can make up for the one that is missing. They can virtually compensate, unless the element that is missing is very, very critical, is an elementary, it has an elementary or basic function that runs the entire circuit. I mean, that is dominant, for example. Otherwise, if you have one single component of the circle or a small group of these neurons in the circuit are activated, that is going to make the whole circuit activated. And that is going to, of course, be an advantage. It will take less cognitive energy. So this is what this tells us. For example, the more sensory modalities that you use, vision, hearing, touch, this, that, the more you integrate these sensory mechanisms, the more extensive the networks that you establish, and the more switches that you have to activate that information. Retrieval, when you retrieve information, you have to kind of first activate the hippocampus, and then the hippocampus is going to get the information down from the same places that stored it. So first, let's take one example. You look and you see the picture of a cat, for example, and that is here in the back, in the visual cortex in the back. That image is first, immediately it is received. When it is received, it is sent to the hippocampus. The hippocampus processes and works with the frontal part of the brain, and then once it processes and sorts out that, it's gonna make connection, fire the information back to the cerebral cortex, to the visual cortex again. And then the information will stay there. If you want to reactivate it, you go to the hippocampus. It knows where the file is in the visual cortex, and you get the information about the cat, then you remember the cat. So after consolidation, the information is sent back to the storage sites that originally received that information. Retrieval implies effort, it implies intention. Like, you ask me a question, I retrieve the information in demand because I know what you're asking about, and I give you information, particularly information that relates to what you are asking for. So the intention to retrieve the information originates in the prefrontal cortex, which activates the hippocampus. And then, like, someone asks you a question. Here, you think about it, what is the best answer, and so on, and go to the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is going to open the files upstairs and give you the right information. So the information is retrieved into units and segments that stay. Once you provide them, another set of units comes in, and it keeps, as you send out some new information, and some other pieces come in and fill in the buffer area. And working memory is the system that enables us to retrieve. So here's the hippocampus, and here are all the sites that store information, and then that information then goes to the hippocampus as you retrieve it. In order to reactivate a verbal pathway, you need about 1 second. And in order to activate a visual pathway, it takes half the time. It takes about a half a second. But complex information may require several minutes. Now, the more frequently someone reviews information, the more frequently someone sees or reads or is exposed to the information again, the faster the pathway becomes, the faster it is reactivated. And when the person reactivates the pathway, the information on it is retrieved. It makes the information live. So information that is not retrieved for an extended period of time might be forgotten. It might, because it doesn't reactivate the networks, and then just it doesn't, there's nothing there to hold it anymore. Learning, we understand from previous units that learning depends on experience and is determined by experience and the nature of experience, how long someone does something, for how many times a week, for example, how many times a day. All of that is going to determine the how robust and how strong that learning process for that person is. So, for example, in therapy and in special education, or with certain people who need more exposure to the information, we use a method called the cyclic method, which means based on cycles. And so you start, say, for example, you want to build vocabulary. You have, a unit where you say, okay, lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, lesson 4, lesson 5, and you teach that during this week. And then you go lesson 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then after that, you go back to the lessons that 1 to 5 that you learned from the first 5 weeks. The first week. And then go over and revisit, put the same words in different sentences, different stories, and so on, revisit them. And then go again to, after that, to unit 2. And then do the same with these stories and vocabulary words. And then, keep doing something else and go back. So you keep going back, for example, once every 3 weeks, and then once every 6 weeks, and once in a while to go back to information that you taught more than once before, and that is going to ensure exposure and consolidation of this skill, the new skill. Once we review, so when we review information that we just learned, it strengthens the synaptic connections. It establishes new synaptic connections, and it strengthens the memory pathways between the hippocampus and the storage sites, because every time the brain, a network fires, it will be more likely that it can fire again, and it will be reactivated faster. So the more it fires, the faster it gets reactivated. And that leads to cognitive efficiency, and cognitive efficiency is dependent, or it has two pieces. One is doing things accurately and doing things fast within, a reasonable period of time. So speed and accuracy make cognitive efficiency. When we review information, let's say for an exam or a quiz or whatever, the first couple of reviews of the information, they are the most important ones. And it is recommended that the students review information at least four times. And they should do that at least 4 days before the exam. So if you do it ahead of time, the reviews ahead of time, that becomes most effective. So research shows that when someone reviews information, for example, the first time, they, like, for example, they gain, go from 20% accuracy to 40% accuracy. So the first time that you read information or hear it, or like this time, for example, you are listening to this lecture, if you do not write notes and so on, you get about 20% in one setting. You sleep, and then the next day you wake up, and you just do a little revision, it is 40% now. And then you skip a day or 2 days and review again, and then accuracy goes to 80 to 90%, and then sleep or skip a day or two and then go back and do a third revision, and now you are 95% accuracy, and that's quite good. But it has to be, these reviews have to be separated by sleep and by an adequate period of time. So this brings to conclusion this unit in terms of the nature of learning and memory, and here are some selected resources. And I do hope that as you look at the material, that you think every time you see something, some insight into some information, to translate it. Think about a strategy that you can use, you can develop out of what you learn, because the goal is to learn this information so that we can derive strategies that we can use in our classrooms or in our clinical practice. So thank you, and until the next lecture, we'll see you.